Hey guys, Helping Hands here, and today I'll be going over some balance changes that I think should be made for the Company of Heroes 3 Allied Factions, March 2023. In part 1, I'll be looking at the Americans and Brits. In part 2, we'll be going over the DAC and the Wehrmacht. To begin with, I'm going to be going over the changes that I think should be global, so every faction should have this change. And let's start with, for instance, grenades and free abilities. So, I'm pretty sure we're all familiar with the Pathfinder opening spam that a lot of people have been up against recently. Now, the reason why the Pathfinders in particular are incredibly strong is because the Recon Flare and the Smoke is free, and none of these share a cooldown. So what I could do is I could pop a flare in the sky, like so. I can drop a smoke nade, and I can do a rifle grenade straight away as well afterwards. So they've just got way too much utility. So what change I would do to something like the Pathfinders would be I would make it so the rifle grenade and the smoke grenade share a cooldown. You could not use both of them, one after the other straight away. I would also make it so the free abilities, Recon Flare and Smoke Rifle Grenade, they all cost a bit of munitions. So at the moment they're free. A bare minimum, I would make it 5 munitions, maybe 10 munitions to be able to use the Recon Flare and the Smoke Rifle Grenade. Moving on to the infantry section, they have access to a free Recon Flare when they unlock the Recce package. I think this should cost about 10 munitions. Also, looking at the Jaeger squad over here, they have a Smoke Grenade and a Recon Flare. Also, again, free, and both these do not share a cooldown like the Pathfinders. Another issue is when you have such units like paratroopers or commandos being called in and them having their ability as soon as they drop in, as you'll now see with this issue. So I'm going to call in some paratroopers right on top of this bunker. So here we go, as soon as the squad comes in, we can immediately then lob this satchel charge straight away onto this bunker, and that is pretty much uncounterable from my opponent, right? There's no way he can kill my full paratrooper squad before I can literally just jump down and lob that satchel. So I've almost pretty much one-shotted this bunker in one go. If I had a little bit of indirect fire, I could have finished it off with a mortar perhaps. So being able to drop in and immediately have my throwables available to me is incredibly strong. And I would suggest them having about 5, maybe to 10 seconds cooldown before they can be used. Now guys, anti-tank guns in Company Heroes 3 are so much worse than they were in Company Heroes 2. They take a lot longer to set up and turn and fire off their shots, making them very vulnerable and quite easy to kill. One thing they do have going for them is that they do have a better firing arc. So if you remember the KO2's firing arcs, they're a bit more narrow, but the all-out firing arcs among all the anti-tank guns, the standard anti-tank guns for each faction. So we've got the American M1 anti-tank gun, the British 6-pounder, the Pack 40 for the Wehrmacht, and the DAC has the Pack 38. All of them have got, fairly decent arcs, but they just take way too long to set up. So what I would do here for all the anti-tank gun varieties, I would just make it so they could set up a little bit quicker and their guns would traverse a little bit quicker as well. And maybe very slightly increase their firing rate so that they're used. But right now, they just seem so lackluster and not really worth building when light vehicles completely dominate the game right now. So that's what I would do. I just maybe buff them up a little bit. Not a huge amount. Maybe not as good as the Company Heroes 2 ones, because I kind of like the vehicle meta right now, but I just want it so that the anti-tank guns are somewhat viable. Right now, they just don't really feel like they are. They just they get one shot off, then they're flanked, and then they're killed, so it's not worth it to make them. And then your opponent steals them, and it's just a nightmare. So, yeah, just buff up the anti-tank guns a little bit. That's what I would do. Another quick one here, guys. It's more of a quality of life change than a balance change here, but across the board, you'll notice that if you make a med truck, they automatically have the auto reinforce disabled by default. It would be nice if that was automatically on by default rather than off, because it's a kind of an annoying task to constantly manually put it on each time. It's also worth noting that let's say you had a CMP truck here and you had the auto force on, but then you were to make it a medical truck, it then loses its auto reinforce button. You'll have to re-enable it a second time so it can reinforce. Same thing with like medical stations and med bunkers. They don't have reinforce. I think this is more to do with, I guess, the Wehrmacht bunker that doesn't have auto reinforce on by default. Would be nice to be able to have that kind of have a button on that concrete bunker so that you could reinforce off it automatically if you wanted to do so. But yeah, you can see here with all these trucks, you've always got to manually turn it on, the auto reinforce on. It's just, it'd be a nice easy change if it was on by default. Next up, I think we can all agree that the loiters that some factions have in the game are incredibly strong right now and probably need a nerf. So, for instance, the British have access to their British Air and Sea Battle Group, which gives them access to the anti-tank rocket loiter. That's incredibly strong. If you pick the DAC and you go for the armor support company, you get access to a Stuka anti-tank launch as well, so that's really strong. That'll be needing a nerf. The Wehrmacht Luftwaffe commander has a loiter as well, which is also very strong. So all these loiters probably need a slight nerf. How would I nerf them? I would probably make it so they take a little bit longer to come onto the battlefield and maybe slightly reduce the damage the amount they do, because they do literally come on and instantly one-shot kind of light tanks and medium tanks even. They might even one-shot them potentially as well if they've taken a little bit of damage. So yeah, they're just very, very good, and I would probably nerf them just a little bit. But right now they're just like, you know, no skill, click button. I pop this on the battlefield and I just take out your entire army without, you know, and then that's, you know, for lower level players, for average players, they're going to have a much harder time trying to quickly react to something like that. And they'll get punished a lot harder for just an easy, oh, I have enough munitions, so I'm going to click my win button. So I would say, yeah, nerf them a little bit, and I think that would be much better for everybody. Let's also talk about an issue that plagued Company Heroes 2 for the longest time during its first early years, and that is the call-in meta, and it is reoccurred in Company Heroes 3, where call-ins are not tied to tech, and they probably should be. So, for instance, if you were to go for the British Armored Battle Group, and you confirm that, you could go straight into a Crusader, into Churchills, for instance, without any tech requirements. So you didn't have to build any of your tech structures. As long as you could just play in tier 1 and just spam infantry sections, you could do that, and then just after you get the CPs, you could call on the Crusader. And then you could then start spamming Churchills into the late game. Now, the reason this is so strong is because you've not had to build the tech, you've saved yourself a lot of resources there that will allow you to go in to spam some more tanks, more Crusaders and more Churchills potentially, right? Now, if we look at the DAC, for instance, the DAC player would have to build every single tier structure, then they would have to buy armor reserves, which is really expensive, and we'll get into why that needs nerfing later on. And then they could finally call in their tanks as well. But at least the DAC have to do all the tech, but the British player doesn't right now. And also, it's not just the Brits, it's other factions as well, and other call-in, and pretty much every vehicle call-in right now across the board is not tied to tech. So you can think about like the Panther for the Wehrmacht. They haven't got to have the Panzer company, their tier 4 tech, to be able to produce the Panther. The DAC, they don't need any tech to call on Carrows, for instance. They probably need tier 2. I would say construct them. They probably would need the mechanized company, so the Carrow would be tied to that before you could start making Carrows. The Americans with their Easy 8s or with the Sherman Whizbang, they would probably need the tank depot before they could call those in. So I feel like all kind of tanks, all kind of vehicles, they should be tied to tech because otherwise it's just too strong. Because, for instance, the DAC player can't really keep up with that if they chosen a different commander, right? Or they haven't got the same kind of capability. I just feel like it's just too easy just to spam call-in units with no kind of other kind of strategy in mind, and it's too easy and it's just too strong basically right now. So they need to nerf it. Next, I want to go over units that have hard-hitting HE capabilities, like the Centaur, the American Bulldozer, the Brumbear, and also the Stug D. Now, all of these units, I personally feel like they all have a very short range, as you'll see. All of these units also have a long travel time of all their rounds. Now, for me personally, what I would do is probably just increase all these units' range by about 10%, especially the Brumbar, which seems to have the shortest range of them all. Let me just back you up slightly here. See, the Brumbar can just about appear up to that rock. The Stugdi can just go about past it. The Bulldozer can go a bit past it as well. And the Centaur probably can go a little bit past as well. So I think like the Brumbar is, definitely got the shortest range out of them all. So I would make it so maybe up to about here. Yeah, I think every one of these could do with a little bit of a range increase. They're more likely, more likely to go for them. Because right now, you're always just going to be going for Panzer IVs rather than the Brumbar because it doesn't feel so, it's got such terrible range. Some of their ability upgrades that you get with these units do increase their range just a little bit, but they need to be Vet 1 before they can do it most of the time, or they need munitions as well. So I would just increase them up. The Stug D doesn't really have that issue too much because as soon as it gets Vet 1, it actually probably a bit broken actually. If I give it Vet 1, its attack ground range, when I lock it down, it can shoot all the way over to here now, which is huge. And also the pencil mount machine gunner on the The Stug D can also shoot that far, which probably shouldn't be the case. It probably should just be the main gun. But as the Stug D doesn't hit as hard as something like the Brumbar or the Bulldozer, maybe its long range right now isn't too bad. But yeah, it is quite strong, the Stug D, at the moment. But overall, I would definitely make it so all of these guns, you know, by their default range, should be a little bit increased. First up, let's start with the Brits. So with the Brits, you start with the Sapper squad, and Sappers right now are honestly probably too good. They're very, very good in the early game, only costing 220 manpower, and they absolutely just tear everything up in the early game with their Sten guns over here. So I would probably nerf them a little bit just in the early game, so they're not so potent with their Sten guns. Maybe make it so once they get more veterancy, that they get their kind of combat capability back a bit later on once they start leveling up a bit. But right now, vanilla Sappers are just way too good, so I would nerf them a little bit with their CQC damage, just so they aren't absolutely just completely dominating squads which cost a lot more than them. Next up, we have the Dingo. Now, the Dingo, I personally think, as a combat unit, is probably fine. You know, not too overpowered there or too underpowered. The issue, though, with the Dingo that I have is that you could use the decoy flares and the forward observation artillery very quickly. And they're also quite cheap, but I think that maybe the cost is fairly fine, but it's more to do with the fact that it's only a 1 minute cooldown on this forward observation barrage. So I could fake out someone there to force them to retreat real quick. So there's no shed cooldown, which is an issue, and then I can drop the artillery as well like that, which is only 60-second cooldown. Now, it's worth noting that when I do use the Dingo artillery, right, it does put a shared cooldown on the infantry sections which have the recce package. However, if I was to do it the other way around, as you're about to find out, I can use 2 lots of artillery. So now I have my recon section. Let's say I'm going to drop an artillery barrage here. So they're going to fire out, and watch, it doesn't put the Dingo on a shared cooldown as soon as this arty goes out. So this is going in, so the base is now firing there. Dingo, then I could use this artillery over here as well. So here we go, Dingo, drop it arty here as well. So I can use 2 lots of artillery potentially. So I feel like what needs to be changed here is that when the infantry section, the recce section, utilises their forward observation artillery, it stops the Dingo from being able to use its artillery barrage as well. Currently it doesn't. I think it's more of a bug, to be honest, but that is a balance change that's needed, because currently the Brits can just throw so much artillery down, which is very, very strong. Now let's talk about the specific battle group for the Brits, which I think is probably one of the main issues why Brits are probably maybe too strong right now, and that is this ability right here, which is the volunteer infantry ability, which you get very early on in the tech tree. Right now, it reduces the reinforcement cost of all infantry squads by 33%, and also the amount of time it takes for them to reinforce as well. So that is huge. 33% is nuts. Basically, you know, when you're fighting up against Brits, you don't feel like you're really ever bleeding them that much in terms of their manpower, because it's much cheaper for them to reinforce squads and stuff. So I might suggest here, maybe remove it from, make it, instead of 33%, nerf it down to 25%. I still like 25%, it's still a huge amount, but maybe 33% is maybe a tad too much. So the Brits are, you know, end up floating a lot of manpower, or are not, you know, feeling the punishment from, you know, losing a lot of men, you know, if they're just spamming infantry sections, for instance. Because you do find games where, you know, the Brit player is churning out 6 to maybe even 8 infantry sections, and they can afford to do it because they ain't, you know, being hurt by the bleed due to this specific ability. Right, so we're now going on to the Americans. Now, I previously talked about the Pathfinders. Now, we all know the Pathfinder spam is very strong right now, but with the changes that I suggested earlier, with making so that their abilities cost munitions and they share cooldowns, I feel like that having those changes will probably sort them out. Because as a combat unit, they're probably balanced, I think. You know, that they seem to do okay amount of damage for their cost. It's just that their abilities make them probably too good right now. So with changing those abilities, they will sort themselves out. Let's talk about the American Airborne ability, Paradrop Reinforcements. This is a fairly early CP ability, which you get fairly early on in the match. And this ability is currently too strong, as it allows you to reinforce for a long period of time in a fight. So let's just have an engagement here. We're going to have a fight going on right now. And what I would do is I would probably initiate, once I start losing some casualties, so just stand out in the open here. We take more men down. Then we drop this in here. And then for 60 seconds, I'm going to get free reinforcement. So only for 80 munitions. It's very cheap for this. I want to constantly get reinforcement on these squads here. So that just increases my survivability in a fight for a long time. So you can see, look, I'm constantly getting men coming in here. The only disadvantage, though, that I do notice with disability is that as my guys are coming in, they're getting that negative cover bonus here. But yeah, as you can see, it's lasting for a long time. Really helped me win the fight. So what I would do to this ability is I'd probably make it cost a bit more. It's currently 80 munitions, so I'd probably make it about 100 munitions. I'd probably shorten its length by maybe 15 seconds, so 45 seconds, because right now it's probably too good. My squads just now were reinforcing even after the ability had finished, which seems probably like a bug. So that's probably why it's also maybe slightly too strong, is that the ability lasts a lot longer than the 60 seconds it states it lasts for. So yeah, that's another reason why it needs to be fixed. Going on to the weapon support center now, the bazooka squads are still a little bit too squishy, so I'd probably maybe increase their health by maybe 10 more on each model. I know they were 80 and they've already been buffed a little bit already, but I still feel like they're probably too squishy. Maybe even make them 5 men as a squad, so they've got a little bit more survivability, because it's very rare that you want to ever, you know, go for a bazooka squad when most people go airborne, and you'll have a more durable paratrooper squad instead, which can also have bazookas. One thing with the bazooka squad, which is a little bit unintended, a bit broken right now, is that their destroy obstacle ability can constantly be used. It's not it never has a cooldown on it when it probably should do, because if this hits a group of units that are up against cover, it does a lot of damage, as you'll see in a second. So for this demonstration, guys, I'm just going to make these guys invincible. We're going to make this an enemy squad, and what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to aim right on them against the cover here, and this shot should, this guy over here is going to do that nasty shot. Look at how much damage that one shot did. A massive amount, because they were clumped up against cover. You see them firing normally with the bazookas, they're not going to be very effective, right? But if I do the destroy obstacle ability here on a clump of them, the guy on the right is going to fire the dangerous zook. Boom, you can see you get lots of kills. So you can use that very effectively, and I imagine that's probably not how this squad's supposed to be, you know, intended to be used like that. So I would probably make it so the destroy obstacle shot isn't like that effective against groups of infantry. I'd also put it on a cooldown of probably 5 to 10 seconds rather than it can instantly be called. This will catch some new players off guard, but against good players they're always going to be mobile, so you're not going to really be able to get off destroy obstacle, because it only really works against squads that are stationary and not moving around, because it does take a long wind-up time to do that ability. But that's how I would change maybe the bazooka squad. Needs that destroy obstacle bit nerf, and maybe buff the health up a bit so that actually can be durable in a fight. Next, I want to talk about the Upgun Sherman. So once you built yourself a Sherman, then you go to your mechanized support center if you've chosen that type of support center, and then you go for the M4A1 76mm conversion for 200 manpower and 50 fuel. It upguns your Sherman and it just makes them so much better at everything. You know, especially against infantry as well. It's just a lot better at just, you know, getting multiple kills for whenever it shoots a squad, for instance. So it's just maybe needs a little bit of a nerf, I think here, maybe just a slight nerf to the Sherman upgun ability, and I think you know, they would be a bit more balanced, because right now they are very, very good with their upgun. So maybe a slight nerf on them. So because the Upgun Sherman is just so good, there's very real reason for you to go for a Hellcat when the Sherman is an amazing all-rounder, and it's much better against killing infantry than the Hellcat is, and it's going to be decent against armor as well. So it just doesn't feel like the Hellcat is probably worth going for. It's also quite expensive as well. It's a bit cheaper than a Sherman, but it's, yeah, I don't know. I just don't feel like I ever see myself going for a Hellcat when it doesn't really even have that much more range than a Sherman either. So maybe the Hellcat probably could do with maybe a slight range increase, so it could maybe be a bit more worth going for. But right now, it just seems just spamming Shermans is the right answer. So guys, that's the end of the video, and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did and want more content, check up over here and over here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, make sure to click the button down here. To catch the next video, guys, take care, and I'll see you soon.